Since October 7th, there's been so much bias against Israel playing out in the media and the media's coverage of the war. We're also now hearing that anti-Israel messaging from podcasters as well, which is quite alarming. The BBC has ordered staff to complete mandatory anti-Semitism training following a series of scandals at the broadcaster. What's your assessment of why we've been seeing this anti-Israel coverage and anti-Israel bias playing out since October 7th?
Look, I think that the seeds of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism have been planted long before October 7th, and October 7th opened the floodgates to allow it to become mainstream and acceptable. Part of it is that anti-Semitism is always there, and anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are now one and the same in many ways. That's one side of it. On the other hand, one can say, and I've spoken to the Australian ambassador to Israel, who told me that he believes that part of the problem is Israeli policy. But I have a very hard time believing that the policy of, for example, Prime Minister Netanyahu impacts swastikas or vandalism or fire bombings in the streets. And so, I think that we're in a very difficult time. We talk in Israel about the 7 physical fronts of the war and the 8th front, which is the PR war, or the battle in the international sphere. And my take is that that battle is going to continue long after any wars physically end, because now that the floodgates are open, and you have to remember, in the United States and all over the world, here you kicked out the Iranian ambassador, right, because we saw that there were funding that was paying for hate crimes to take place on your soil. In America, too, all over the world, you've got Iran, you've got Qatar, you've got Al Jazeera feeding the flames, right, of this anti-Israel sentiment. And too often, and you know it as well as I do as journalists, it moves so fast today, and there is so little recognition for the need to check facts before they're reported, partially for clicks and partially because people are being driven, unfortunately for our field, by their emotions rather than reality. And when you mention podcasters, I think that's where social media podcasters, this is where you see it play out more and more, as opposed to even in mainstream media, where at least there is still a little bit of checks and balances left.
Yes, we need a few more of them, I think, as we've seen in the last 2 years. But you touched on, of course, anti-Semitism, and you're now here in Australia where we've seen anti-Semitism soar, sadly. It's really shameful. What do you make of what's been happening here in Australia? What are Israelis, what people over in Israel, what do they think of what's happening here in Australia when we've seen the number of assaults, abuse, vandalism, hate messages? They're up almost 5 times the level that they were before October 7. We've, of course, seen the torching of the Israel synagogue in Melbourne. Absolutely horrific. Can I get your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, look, it was actually very interesting. Right before I came to Australia a few weeks ago, there was a solidarity event held at Tel Aviv University. It was an Australian-Israel solidarity event. In the past, when we had solidarity events like this take place, the majority of the people were Australian or Australian-born immigrants who came out to support Israel. This was the first time about a third of the people in attendance were Israeli-born individuals, Israelis. And I asked some of them, why are you here, right? And they said, well, we feel we need to stand with the people of Australia. One of the striking things that has happened since October 7th is that the linkage between what happens in Israel and the diaspora Jews has become stronger than ever. And there is now much more of an understanding that we need to be working together, that just as the diaspora Jews are supporting Israel, Israel needs to support the diaspora Jews. The Minister of Aliyah and Integration held a very interesting workshop a week or two ago while I was here, where they brought together the leaders of a number of supporting organizations to talk about what would happen if all of a sudden there was a need for a mass migration to Israel, a rapid one, based on some kind of very, God forbid, dangerous event or feeling that Jews were no longer safe. And I'll tell you, as I've been walking the streets of Australia, I haven't felt anything, but I have been interviewing the Jews in Melbourne and in Sydney for articles that I'm working on. And the sentiment that I'm getting is they're proud and they want to stay, but on the other hand, they feel that something shifted. They feel a little bit more unsafe. They're maybe not wearing, the Magen David, the Jewish star. They're not wearing their yarmulke or their kippah, and they're feeling afraid on a bus. And that's a really bad place to be. It's also an indication of where a country is going, because, that saying of it starts with the Jews, but it doesn't end with the Jews, generally plays out as true.
Yeah. Mine Hoffman, ILTV's executive editor and strategist, thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.